Hashtag the Hacker News Weekly Podcast. Top 10 stories, August 10 through 16th, 2025. Introduction. Welcome to the Hacker News Weekly, where we bring you the most engaging and important stories from a week of intense debate and discussion in the tech community. This week, August 10th through 16th, 2025, we reviewed 194 stories, and I've curated the top 10 that sparked the most passionate conversations and revealed the biggest tensions in our industry. From surveillance overreach to the collapse of streaming services, from AI breakthroughs to corporate betrayals of open source values. This week's stories paint a picture of an industry at multiple crossroads. We're seeing fundamental questions being raised about privacy, about the role of AI in development, about whether the promises of the digital revolution are being kept or broken. So let's dive into the stories that had thousands of developers, entrepreneurs, and tech enthusiasts arguing late into the night. Part 1. The surveillance state strikes back. Let's start with the two stories that have people genuinely worried about the future of digital freedom. Story: Fight chat control. All right, so we need to talk about something that's got the European tech community absolutely up in arms. It's called Fight Chat Control, and this story just exploded on Hacker News with nearly 1,500 points and almost 500 comments. And honestly, once you hear what the EU is trying to pull here, you'll understand why people are so fired up. So here's the deal. The European Union has this proposal on the table called Chat Control, and it's basically asking for the power to automatically scan every single private digital communication. We're talking messages, photos, files, everything for 450 million EU citizens. And when I say everything, I mean everything. Your WhatsApp messages to your mom, your Signal chats with friends, those encrypted work communications, all of it would be subject to automatic scanning without any suspicion of wrongdoing, without your consent, without a warrant, just constant surveillance. Now, the stated goal here is protecting children from abuse material, which obviously everyone supports as a goal, but here's where it gets really problematic. And this is what's driving the tech community crazy. To make this work, they'd essentially have to break end-to-end encryption. You know, that fundamental technology that keeps your banking info safe, your medical records private, your business communications secure. They're basically saying we need to put a backdoor in every lock to keep everyone safe, which, anyone who knows anything about security knows that's not how safety works.
What's really fascinating about the Hacker News discussion is how it reveals this incredible frustration among European users. One commenter pointed out something that it's so brazen, it's almost unbelievable. The EU politicians pushing this, they've exempted themselves from the surveillance under something called professional secrecy rules. So they're literally creating a system where they get to keep their privacy while surveilling everyone else. Can you imagine? Privacy for me, but not for thee? It's like something out of a dystopian novel. The current state of play is pretty tense. 15 member states are supporting this, 3 are opposed, and 9 are sitting on the fence. And the community is not taking this lying down. People in the comments are sharing how they've been contacting their MEPs, donating to privacy projects like Graphene OS. There's this real sense of we need to fight this now before it's too late. But here's what really caught my attention in the discussion, and this shows how these things tend to snowball. People are connecting this to other surveillance initiatives happening across Europe. There's apparently legislation in some countries that would require age verification for accessing adult content online, with actual prison sentences for noncompliance. So you've got this whole surveillance infrastructure being built piece by piece, and chat control is like the crown jewel of it all. The technical community is particularly alarmed because they understand the implications better than most. Once you break encryption for one purpose, you've broken it for all purposes. It's not like you can create a special good guys only backdoor. Every hacker, every hostile government, every criminal organization would be trying to exploit those same vulnerabilities. Child protection experts, and get this, even the UN, are saying this would actually make children less safe by weakening overall security and diverting resources from things that actually work. There was one interesting contrarian view in the discussion, though. A user suggested this might all be political theater, that the EU is just posturing to look tough on child protection, but won't actually pass something this extreme.
And there was a Czech Pirate Party MEP in the comments who seemed pretty confident that even if the council approves it, the European Parliament would shoot it down. But you know what really strikes me about this whole situation? It's the global precedent it would set. If the EU, which likes to position itself as this bastion of privacy rights with GDPR and all that, if they implement mass surveillance like this, what's to stop authoritarian governments around the world from saying, well, if the EU does it, why can't we? It's basically handing a blueprint for digital authoritarianism to every government that wants one. The community response has been pretty remarkable, though. People aren't just complaining. They're organizing, they're educating others, they're looking for technical workarounds. There's discussion about using alternative communication methods, about supporting privacy-focused projects, about the legal challenges that would inevitably follow if this passes. What's wild is that this is happening at the same time that we're seeing more and more people wake up to privacy concerns generally. You've got people fleeing to Signal and other encrypted platforms. You've got growing awareness about data collection, and then the EU comes along with this proposal that would basically make all of that moot. It's like we're at this crossroads where we either double down on privacy and encryption as fundamental rights, or we just give up and accept total surveillance as the price of living in a digital society. And honestly, the fact that this story got so much traction on Hacker News tells you something. This isn't just techies being paranoid. This is a genuine threat to fundamental freedoms that even mainstream tech workers are deeply concerned about. When you've got nearly 500 people jumping into the comments to discuss surveillance overreach, that's not a niche concern anymore. That's mainstream worry about where our digital future is heading. And if you think chat control is bad, wait until you hear how the UK is handling internet regulation. All right, now we're diving into something that's got the Hacker News crowd absolutely fired up. Wikipedia has just lost its legal challenge against the UK's Online Safety Act. And folks, this one's a doozy. Over 1,000 points and 850 comments, and I can see why people are so worked up about this. So here's what's happening. The UK government has this Online Safety Act, right? And they're potentially putting Wikipedia, yes, the encyclopedia we all rely on, into their strictest regulatory category, the same one they use for massive social media platforms like Facebook and Twitter. The Wikimedia Foundation tried to challenge this in court, arguing that treating Wikipedia like it's some kind of social media platform is, well, completely missing the point of what Wikipedia actually is. And here's where it gets really concerning. If Wikipedia gets stuck in this Category 1 classification, they'd have to verify the identities of all their volunteer editors. Now, if you know anything about how Wikipedia works, you know this would fundamentally break the entire model. We're talking about hundreds of thousands of volunteers around the world who contribute anonymously. Some of them are in countries where, let's be real, editing certain Wikipedia articles could get you in serious trouble with your government. The Wikimedia Foundation is basically stuck between a rock and a hard place here. They're saying they have two options to avoid this classification. Either cut UK access to Wikipedia by about 75% or disable key functions on the site for UK users. Can you imagine the UK potentially losing most of its access to Wikipedia because of safety regulations that were supposedly designed to protect people from harmful content on social media? What's really striking about the Hacker News discussion is just how unanimous the criticism is. I mean, usually you get some defenders of government policy in these threads, but this time it's pretty much wall-to-wall criticism. People are pointing out the obvious, that VPNs exist, that this won't actually protect anyone, and that it's really about control more than safety. There's this fascinating thread about a guy named William Perrin OBE, who apparently had roles at both Carnegie UK, which helped design these regulations, and Ofcom, which enforces them. Some commenters are digging into potential financial connections to age verification companies. And look, I'm not saying there's definitely something fishy there, but when the same names keep popping up in both the creation and enforcement of regulations, it does make you wonder about conflicts of interest. One commenter made a point that really stuck with me.
They said this is like using a sledgehammer to crack a nut, except the sledgehammer misses the nut entirely and just smashes everything else nearby. Because let's think about this. Wikipedia is one of the most valuable public resources on the internet. It's nonprofit, it's run by volunteers, it's been this incredible experiment in collaborative knowledge building for over 2 decades. And now it might get crippled in the UK because regulators can't figure out how to write laws that distinguish between a collaborative encyclopedia and, actual social media platforms where people share conspiracy theories and harassment.
The technical folks in the comments are having a field day pointing out how easy this will be to circumvent. VPNs, proxy servers, mirror sites. The people who want to access Wikipedia will still access it. But what about your average person who just wants to quickly look something up? What about students doing research? They're the ones who will suffer if Wikipedia has to restrict UK access. There's actually one contrarian view in the thread that's kind of interesting, even if I don't fully agree with it. This commenter, Paul Mick, argues that Wikipedia losing might actually be good in the long run, because now they'll have to take real action, like blocking UK users, which will create such an outcry that it might force the government to reconsider. It's a very burn it all down to rebuild approach, but I can see the logic. Sometimes you need a crisis to get people to pay attention. What really gets me about this whole situation is how it exemplifies a broader problem we're seeing with internet regulation worldwide. Governments want to regulate the internet, which, okay, there are legitimate concerns about online safety, especially for kids. But they keep writing these broad, sweeping laws that don't account for the diversity of what actually exists online. They're trying to apply the same rules to Facebook, to Wikipedia, to your local community forum, to everything, and it just doesn't work. The judgment apparently emphasized that regulators need to ensure Wikipedia is protected, which sounds nice, but actions speak louder than words, right? If the law is written in such a way that Wikipedia could be forced to compromise its core principles, then saying we need to protect Wikipedia while enforcing that law is pretty hollow. You know what's really ironic here? The UK government says this is all about protecting people from harmful content online. But Wikipedia is literally one of the best examples we have of community moderation actually working. They've built this incredible system over decades, where volunteers fact-check, debate, and maintain quality standards. And now the government's saying, nope, not good enough. We need to know who all these people are. The potential consequences here extend way beyond just the UK, too. If Wikipedia caves and starts verifying identities in the UK, other countries will demand the same thing. And then you can kiss goodbye to editors in China contributing to articles about Tiananmen Square, or editors in Russia updating pages about the war in Ukraine, or you get the picture. The anonymity isn't just about privacy. For many editors, it's about safety.
This whole saga really highlights how poorly equipped our current political and regulatory systems are to deal with the internet. We've got lawmakers who fundamentally don't understand the platforms they're regulating, writing laws that sound good in press releases but cause chaos in practice, and the platforms that actually benefit society, like Wikipedia, end up as collateral damage. Speaking of platforms being ruined by corporate decisions, let's talk about how some of our most beloved tech companies are systematically destroying the very things that made them successful. All right, so our next story is about GitHub no longer being independent at Microsoft after their CEO resignation. And wow, this one really struck a nerve in the tech community. We're talking 1,400 points and over 1,100 comments on Hacker News, which tells you right away that people have strong feelings about this. So here's what happened. Thomas Dohmke, who's been GitHub's CEO for almost 4 years, just announced he's stepping down to, quote, become a startup founder again. But here's the kicker. Microsoft isn't replacing him. Instead, they're folding GitHub's entire leadership team directly into Microsoft's core AI organization. And just like that, after 7 years of operating as this quasi-independent company within Microsoft, GitHub's independence is, well, gone.
When Microsoft bought GitHub back in 2018 for $7.5 billion, there was this huge fear in the developer community. Would Microsoft ruin it? Would they turn it into some corporate monstrosity? And honestly, for years, those fears seemed unfounded. GitHub kept humming along, they added features like actions, made private repos free. Things were actually pretty good under what some commenters are calling the cool Microsoft era. But now, man, the sentiment has really shifted. One commenter put it perfectly. They said, "We're watching the end of cool Microsoft in real time." And when you look at the pattern, it's hard to argue. Remember Xamarin? Microsoft bought it, promised the world, and now it's basically dead. Or look at .NET. They keep saying it's cross-platform, but try developing for it on anything other than Windows without buying expensive third-party tools like Writer, and you'll see how cross-platform it really is.
What's really interesting and kind of concerning is that they're putting GitHub under core AI specifically, not under Azure, not under developer division, but core AI. That tells you everything about Microsoft's priorities right now. They're looking at GitHub's massive repository of code. We're talking about basically all the world's open source code. And they're seeing training data. They're seeing AI opportunities. They're not necessarily seeing a developer platform that needs to serve developers first. The discussion on Hacker News is fascinating because you've got people who've lived through these corporate absorptions before, and they're painting a pretty grim picture. One person described what happens when an independent unit gets absorbed into the parent company. Suddenly, you're dealing with corporate politics, your roadmap gets hijacked by some VP's pet project, features that customers actually want get deprioritized for things that look good in quarterly reports. It's like watching a slow-motion train wreck. And the AI angle is really rubbing people the wrong way. There's this sense that big tech companies, Microsoft included, are so desperate to show they're doing AI that they're sacrificing everything else. One commenter called it virtue signaling to investors, which harsh, but when you look at something like Windows Recall, that feature that screenshots everything you do, you start to wonder if they have a point. They've got access to all of GitHub's code, and yet their AI coding assistants are still, let's be honest, pretty mediocre compared to competitors. Now, to be fair, not everyone's doom and gloom about this. There's a minority view that maybe this isn't such a bad thing. One commenter pointed out that Domke's leadership was heavy on buzzwords and light on actual innovation. Despite all the AI hype, GitHub Copilot didn't exactly dominate the AI editor market the way you'd expect from a company with GitHub's advantages. Maybe fresh blood, even if it's Microsoft blood, could actually help. But here's what really gets me. This feels like such a predictable story in tech. Big company buys smaller company, promises to keep it independent, actually keeps it independent for a while, everyone relaxes, and then, bam, the integration happens. The unique culture disappears. The product starts serving the parent company's strategic goals instead of its users' needs. The timing is also suspicious, right? Just as the AI wars are heating up, just as every tech company is scrambling to show they're an AI company, suddenly GitHub needs to be under the AI organization. Come on, that's not a coincidence. What worries me most is what this means for the open source community. GitHub became the de facto home for open source not because it was the best technically. There are arguments for GitLab or other platforms, but because it was trusted. It felt neutral-ish, despite the Microsoft ownership. But if it becomes just another cog in Microsoft's AI machine, I don't know, that trust is fragile, and once it's gone, it's really hard to get back. The comments are full of people already talking about alternatives, about maybe it being time to reconsider self-hosting, about GitLab looking more attractive. And that's the thing about developer platforms. Developers are not a loyal bunch when it comes to tools. They'll move if they need to. They've done it before. So yeah, this is one of those stories where the immediate news, CEO leaving, organizational restructuring, is less important than what it represents. It's about the end of an era, about big tech's AI obsession potentially ruining good products, and about whether we can ever really trust big companies to keep their promises about independence. The 1,100 comments aren't just about GitHub, they're about the entire trajectory of the tech industry right now.
And speaking of industries destroying themselves through greed and mismanagement, all right, so our next story is something I think a lot of you are going to relate to. Streaming services are driving viewers back to piracy, and wow, did this one blow up on Hacker News with over 1,000 points and nearly 800 comments. People have feelings about this topic. You know what's wild? We've basically come full circle. Remember back in, say, 2010 when everyone was pirating everything? Then Netflix came along, and for this beautiful moment, let's call it the golden age from about 2015 to 2020, we had this simple deal. Pay $10 a month, get basically everything you want to watch, no hassle. Piracy rates plummeted because, honestly, why bother with torrents when Netflix just worked? But here's where it gets interesting and frustrating. The article points out that we've essentially recreated cable TV, except somehow we made it worse. At least with cable, you paid one bill and flipped channels. Now you need Netflix for Stranger Things, Disney Plus for Marvel stuff, Max for HBO shows, Paramount Plus for Star Trek, Apple TV Plus for Ted Lasso. I mean, the author gives us perfect example where they're watching this show called Medici on Netflix, right? Gets totally invested in it, and then poof, it vanishes from Netflix. Turns out it's only available to buy on Amazon Prime now. Not rent, not stream with subscription, buy.
And Sweden, this is fascinating. Sweden is leading the charge back to piracy in the developed world, which is deeply ironic when you think about it, because Sweden gave us both Spotify, which basically solved music piracy, and the Pirate Bay, which, well, it's like they're the Switzerland of digital content, playing both sides. The Hacker News discussion on this is absolutely brutal toward the streaming services. One commenter laid out the math. If you want decent coverage of content now, you're looking at Netflix, Disney Plus, Max, Hulu, Paramount Plus, Apple TV Plus, maybe Peacock. That's easily $100 a month, more than cable ever was. And for what? Each service has maybe 2 or 3 shows you actually care about. But here's what really gets people fired up in the comments. It's not just the cost, it's that the pirated experience is often better than the legal one. Think about that for a second. You pay for a service and you get compressed audio, weird device restrictions, can't watch offline without jumping through hoops, content that disappears randomly. Meanwhile, someone downloads a file illegally and gets perfect 4K quality, Dolby Atmos sound, works on any device, keeps it forever. One commenter put it perfectly. They said streaming services are now competing against free and losing on features. That's not a great business model. The technical limitations are maddening, too. People in the comments are sharing stories about how they can't watch 4K content they're paying for because their monitor doesn't have the right HDCP version, or their browser isn't approved, or they're using Linux. I mean, imagine explaining to someone from 2005 that in 2024, with all our technological advances, paying customers get a worse experience than pirates. They'd think you were joking. And the ads. Oh my God, the ads. Even when you pay for the ad-free tiers now, you still get promos for other shows. You can't skip the intros. Some services are introducing ads even in their premium tiers. Amazon Prime Video just announced they're adding ads unless you pay extra. It's like, what are we even paying for anymore? Now, there was one interesting counterpoint in the discussion. A few people pointed out that iTunes, or Apple TV purchases, whatever we're calling it now, actually does this right. You rent a movie, you get the full quality, Dolby Atmos, special features, and if you bought an HD version years ago, they upgrade you to 4K for free. No subscription needed. It's almost like treating customers with respect. Works. Revolutionary concept. But my favorite comment in the whole thread was from someone who said piracy actually made them watch better content. Because when you have to actively search for and download something, you're more selective. You're not just mindlessly scrolling through Netflix's algorithm's recommended garbage for an hour before settling on rewatching The Office for the 15th time. There's something kind of beautiful about that. Piracy as a form of mindful consumption.
The real tragedy here, and this is what multiple commenters pointed out, is that the industry had the answer. Netflix circa 2018 was the answer. People will absolutely pay for convenience and quality. The music industry learned this with Spotify and Apple Music. Make it easy, make it comprehensive, make it affordable, and piracy becomes a non-issue. But the video streaming industry, they looked at that success and said, nah, let's fragment everything, jack up prices, add restrictions, and wonder why people are dusting off their VPNs. You know what someone in the comments called the current situation? The enshittification of streaming. And honestly, yeah, that about sums it up. We had something good and greed killed it. Now we're all back to sailing the high seas, except this time we're doing it with symmetric gigabit fiber instead of DSL. Progress, I guess. Story. VC-backed company just killed my EU trademark for small OSS project. And if you think big companies bullying consumers is bad, wait until you hear what they're doing to open source projects. All right, so our next story is hitting a real nerve in the open source community. VC-backed company just killed my EU trademark for a small OSS project. And wow, with over 800 points and 240 comments, this one clearly struck a chord. So here's what went down. An open source maintainer had their EU trademark for DeepKit successfully canceled by a company called DeepKey. Note the missing T. And get this, DeepKey has a $660 million in VC funding behind them. It's like watching a heavyweight boxer step into the ring with someone who just does martial arts as a weekend hobby. The community response has been fascinating and honestly pretty divided. Most folks are basically saying, run, don't walk away from this fight. And you know what? They're probably right. Multiple commenters shared their own war stories about going up against well-funded corporations in trademark disputes. And it never ends well for the little guy. One person put it perfectly. They said, fighting this is like lighting money on fire, because even if you win, you lose. The legal fees alone could bankrupt most open source maintainers. But here's where it gets really interesting. There's this fundamental incompatibility between how trademark law works and how open source projects operate. Trademark law was designed for commercial entities that generate revenue, track their users, have marketing budgets. Meanwhile, most open source projects, they're labors of love. No revenue, no user tracking, just code out there helping people. So when these worlds collide, the open source folks are at a massive disadvantage from the get-go. Now, there was one contrarian voice in the discussion that caught my attention. A commenter named Jonas21 pointed out that actually the open source maintainer might have started this fight by trying to block DeepKey's trademark registration first. If that's true, it kind of changes the narrative from big company bullies small developer to company defends itself after being challenged. Though honestly, even if that's the case, the power imbalance is still pretty stark. Some folks suggested getting creative with the response. Instead of a legal fight, why not turn it into a PR campaign? One clever suggestion was to file complaints about DeepKey's B Corp certification. Apparently, being a certified B Corporation means you're supposed to act ethically, and bullying open source projects, well, that doesn't exactly scream ethical behavior. Others said just use it as an opportunity to rebrand with a better name and get some sympathy publicity in the process. The really ironic part, several commenters pointed out that the open source project probably doesn't even need to change its name. They have prior use rights. And apparently, DeepKey already argued in their filing that the two projects operate in completely different markets and there's no consumer confusion. So why would they come after the project again? They've essentially admitted there's no conflict. But you know what really gets me about this whole situation? It's the chilling effect it has on the entire open source ecosystem. How many developers are going to think twice about naming their projects now? How many are going to avoid trademarking at all because they know they can't defend it? It's like we're creating this environment where only the wealthy can truly protect their intellectual property, and that's not great for innovation. There's also this broader question about whether trademark law even makes sense in its current form. Multiple commenters pointed out how broken the system is. You can lose your trademark just by not having the resources to defend it, regardless of who's actually in the right. That's not justice. That's just capitalism, I guess. The consensus seems to be that if you're an open source maintainer in this situation, your best bet is to just walk away. Maybe make some noise on social media about it and move on with your life. Fighting it isn't worth the stress, the money, or the time you could be spending actually coding. It's depressing advice, but probably realistic. Now, let's shift gears to talk about AI, but not in the way you might expect. While everyone's excited about the possibilities, the real story this week is about the messy reality of integrating AI into our existing tools and workflows. Story: Claude Sonnet 4 now supports 1 million tokens of context. All right, so our next story has the AI world buzzing. Claude Sonnet 4 now supports a massive 1 million tokens of context. And folks, this is kind of a big deal, but maybe not for the reasons you'd think. So Anthropic just dropped this update, and on paper it sounds incredible. We're talking about a 5x increase from their previous context window. To put that in perspective, you could feed Claude an entire codebase with over 75,000 lines of code, or dozens of research papers, all in a single request. The whole thing, just boom, right into the context window. But here's where it gets interesting and why the Hacker News crowd is having such a heated debate about this. See, there's this fundamental tension emerging between what's technically possible and what's actually useful. The pricing structure tells part of the story. If you stay under 200,000 tokens, you're paying $3 per million tokens for input and $15 for output. That's double the cost once you start really using that expanded context. And the community reaction has been, let's call it, complicated. You've got folks who are absolutely thrilled. There's this user, Cyclope, who's basically saying, I'm never going back to coding without this. They're talking about how Claude helps them execute ideas rapidly, especially when they're tired of manual coding. Bolt.new, the development platform, they're claiming Claude Sonnet 4 consistently outperforms other models for code generation workflows. But then you've got the skeptics, and they're raising some really valid points. Multiple developers are saying, hold on, didn't Anthropic claim 200K context before, but in reality it would start forgetting things or getting confused way before that? There's this trust issue where people feel like the marketing numbers don't match the experience. One user compared it to dumping an entire codebase on a junior developer. Sure, they have access to everything, but can they actually make sense of it all? What really caught my attention was this debate about whether bigger is actually better. Simon Reiter made this fascinating point that maybe the problem isn't that we need more context, but that we need better filtering and prioritization. It's like, imagine you're trying to help someone debug a specific function, and instead of showing them the relevant files, you hand them a printed copy of the entire Linux kernel. More information isn't always helpful information. The use cases Anthropic is highlighting are pretty compelling, though. They're talking about 3 main scenarios: large-scale code analysis, where you need to understand entire project architectures and cross-file dependencies, document synthesis for things like extensive legal contracts, and these context-aware agents that can maintain coherence across hundreds of tool calls. That last one is particularly interesting because it suggests they're thinking about this as infrastructure for more complex AI systems, not just chatbots. But here's the thing that's got developers really worked up: the cost scaling. Some users are pointing out that this pricing model, especially with what seems like quadratic scaling in some cases, could make this prohibitively expensive for actual production use. One commenter mentioned they're already struggling with the costs of regular context windows for their applications, and this just makes it worse. There's also this philosophical question emerging about how we should be using these tools. Are we trying to replace human understanding with brute force context? Or should we be developing smarter ways to extract and present only the relevant information? It's reminiscent of the old debates in software engineering about whether to throw more hardware at a problem or optimize the code. What's fascinating is seeing the divide between individual developers who are using Claude for personal projects. They seem way more enthusiastic, versus teams trying to integrate this into production systems who are much more concerned about costs and reliability. It's almost like we're seeing two different products here, one for experimentation and rapid prototyping, another for serious production workloads, and they might need different approaches entirely. The timing of this announcement is interesting too. We're in this AI arms race where every major player is trying to one-up each other on context window size. But as several commenters pointed out, maybe we're optimizing for the wrong metric. Maybe instead of asking, how much can we fit, we should be asking, how can we make the AI better at finding and using the right information? Speaking of Claude and the AI revolution in coding,
All right, let's dive into something that's stirring up quite the debate in the developer community. Our next story is Claude Code is all you need. And with over 800 points and 500 comments on Hacker News, this one really struck a nerve. So here's the deal. A developer just shared their experience completely ditching all the fancy AI coding tools, Cursor, Klein, Zed, you name it, for something much simpler. Claude Code running right in their terminal. And get this, they're so convinced it's better that they upgraded from a $20 GPT subscription to Claude's $100 per month max plan. That's 5 times the cost for what they openly admit is a less polished product, with UI lag and missing features like advanced voice mode. But here's why this is fascinating. It's not about the bells and whistles. This developer loves Claude Code because it fits perfectly into their existing Vim and terminal workflow. No learning new tools, no switching contexts, just AI assistants right where they already work. They've been cranking out projects left and right with it. An autonomous startup builder, a splitwise replacement, even a browser plugin that rates Hacker News comments, which, honestly, that's pretty meta. Now, the security approach here is where things get really spicy. The author literally tells InfoSec professionals to stop reading now and keep your medication close at hand because they're running this AI with what they call dangerously skip permissions, basically giving Claude Code carte blanche access to their systems, including production servers. They're feeding it massive amounts of context, letting it see everything, modify anything. It's the coding equivalent of driving without a seatbelt while juggling chainsaws. The Hacker News discussion around this is absolutely wild. We're seeing this new phenomenon that commenters are calling vibe coding. Developers who lean so heavily on AI that they don't actually understand the code being generated. One commenter mentioned they're seeing this create a real crisis in hiring. Candidates who can talk about projects they've built, but can't explain how any of it actually works. There's this fascinating split in the community right now. On one side, you've got developers celebrating this experimental freedom, saying it lets them prototype ideas at lightning speed. They're treating coding like they're conducting an orchestra rather than playing every instrument themselves. On the other side, well, there are folks absolutely horrified by what this means for code quality and developer skills. One particularly interesting counterpoint came from a user who argued that the GPT ecosystem actually provides better value, cheaper pricing, native apps across all platforms, and you're not putting all your eggs in one very expensive basket. And let's be real about those projects the author built. They're cool demos, but we're talking about a basic Trello clone and organized bank statements, not exactly pushing the boundaries of software engineering. What really gets me about this whole discussion is what it reveals about where we're headed as an industry. Are we looking at a future where developers become more like directors than writers? Where understanding implementation details becomes less important than knowing how to prompt and guide AI effectively? The practical limitations are worth noting too. Multiple commenters reported issues with Claude's reliability, hitting rate limits during critical work, and apparently Anthropic's customer support is, let's just say, it's not winning any awards. Imagine paying $100 a month and not being able to reach anyone when the service goes down during a deadline. But you know what? Despite all the concerns, there's something undeniably compelling about a tool that just gets out of your way and lets you build. The author's point about not having to learn yet another IDE or adapt to someone else's workflow, that resonates. Sometimes the best tool isn't the most feature-rich one.
It's the one that fits seamlessly into how you already work. The all-you-need framing might be hyperbolic. Clearly, you also need $100 a month, a strong stomach for security risks, and a willingness to debug code you didn't write and might not understand. But as an experiment in how AI can augment development workflows, this is exactly the kind of bold experimentation we need to see, even if it makes the security folks reach for their blood pressure medication. And speaking of AI integration into existing tools, all right, moving on to something that's got the audio and video processing community pretty excited. FFmpeg 8.0 adds Whisper support. This pulled in over 1,000 points on Hacker News, and honestly, the discussion around it is fascinating for reasons you might not expect. So first off, if you're not familiar with Whisper, it's OpenAI's speech recognition model that's been absolutely crushing it in terms of accuracy and language support. And FFmpeg, well, that's basically the Swiss Army knife of media processing that powers, just about everything you use to watch or listen to content online. Netflix, YouTube, VLC, they're all built on FFmpeg's shoulders in one way or another.
Now, here's where things get interesting. The actual article about this release, completely blocked by an anti-scraping system called Anubis. I mean, talk about irony, right? Here we have news about open source software integrating AI capabilities, and you can't even read about it because the website is trying to keep AI scrapers out. It's using this proof-of-work challenge system, kind of like what cryptocurrencies use for mining, to make mass scraping prohibitively expensive. The tension between AI development and content creators trying to protect their work, it's real, folks. But let's talk about what this integration actually means, because the Hacker News discussion is gold. People are already using Whisper through FFmpeg for all sorts of creative workflows. One user mentioned they're using it through subtitle edit. Apparently, there's this whole ecosystem of tools that are leveraging this integration for everything from creating YouTube captions to transcribing old family videos. What's really caught my attention, though, is the debate about how FFmpeg implemented this. They didn't actually build Whisper directly into FFmpeg's core. Instead, they're using a wrapper around Whisper.c++, which is itself a C++ port of the original Python implementation. Some folks in the comments are not happy about this approach. There's this user, jhatemyjob, great username, by the way, who's arguing that this whole implementation is kind of a mess. They're saying that if you want to do live transcription, you're better off just using Whisper.c++ directly because the FFmpeg integration adds unnecessary complexity without much benefit. And you know what? They might have a point. The way it's set up now, if you want to use Whisper through FFmpeg, you need to manage external dependencies, download the models separately, make sure your build passes with all the right flags. It's not exactly plug and play. For someone who just wants to transcribe their podcast or add subtitles to their YouTube videos, this could be a real headache. But here's the thing, and this is what I find exciting. People are seeing this as just the beginning. The discussion keeps coming back to this idea that FFmpeg could become this central hub for ML-powered media processing. Imagine having upscaling models, noise cancellation, background removal, all integrated into the same tool that already handles your video encoding and format conversion. One command line, boom. Your grainy 480p video from 2005 is now crisp 4K with perfect audio. The practical tips people are sharing are super helpful too. Like, apparently if you're using subtitle edit with Whisper, you need to manually copy some CUDA files around to get GPU acceleration working properly. And there's this whole thing about choosing the right model size. Larger models are more accurate, but way slower. And for a lot of use cases, the medium model hits that sweet spot. What really strikes me about this whole discussion is how it represents this broader shift we're seeing in software development. Traditional tools that we've relied on for decades are suddenly getting AI superpowers. But the integration isn't always smooth. It's messy, it's complicated, and sometimes it feels like we're duct taping rockets onto bicycles. But that's how progress happens, right? The first version is never perfect. I think what we're witnessing here is the awkward teenage phase of AI integration into established software ecosystems.
FFmpeg's been around since 2000. That's ancient in tech years. And now it's trying to adapt to this new world where machine learning models are becoming as fundamental as codecs. The growing pains are real, but the potential? Man, the potential is huge. In the midst of all this complexity, surveillance laws, corporate takeovers, AI integration headaches, there's a counter-movement emerging. People are starting to question whether all this technology is actually making our lives better or just more complicated. Now, let's dive into something that really struck a chord with the Hacker News community. A story titled, "I tried every to-do app and ended up with a .txt file." This one racked up over 1,300 points and nearly 700 comments. And honestly, I totally get why. So here's the deal. This author spent years, and I mean years, trying every productivity app under the sun. Notion, OmniFocus, Todoist, you name it, they tried it. And where did they end up? With a plain old text file. Just a .txt file sitting on their desktop. And you know what? They're arguing it's actually the best solution they've ever found. The article makes this pretty provocative claim that the entire productivity app industry is basically selling us unnecessary complexity. Think about it. How many hours have you spent setting up the perfect Notion workspace, creating all those databases, linking them together, setting up templates? The author calls Notion a graveyard of abandoned databases. And, ooh, that hits close to home, doesn't it? I've definitely got a few digital graveyards of my own.
What's fascinating is how each app failed in its own special way. Todoist turned into this weird game where people were more focused on earning karma points than actually getting work done. OmniFocus? Apparently you need an actual manual to use it effectively. I mean, if you need a manual for your to-do list, maybe that's a sign something's gone wrong. But here's where it gets really interesting. The author argues that plain text files have all these advantages we've forgotten about. They're completely future-proof. You'll be able to open that .txt file 50 years from now, no problem. Can you say the same about your proprietary app format? They load instantly, they're searchable, you can version control them with Git if you're into that, and there's literally zero learning curve. You just type your tasks. That's it. Now, the discussion on Hacker News, that's where things got really spicy. You've got this fascinating split in the community. On one side, there are the minimalists who are like, yes, finally someone said it. But then, and this is where it gets funny, a lot of these same people start talking about their simple text file setup, and it turns out they've got custom Python scripts, cron jobs, maybe some LLMs thrown in for good measure. They've basically rebuilt a complex to-do app, just in a really complicated DIY way. One commenter, Don Neufeld, came in hot with a completely different perspective. They're managing over 100 daily tasks across multiple complex life streams, work stuff, family obligations, investments, legal matters, and they're basically saying, look, a text file is fine for your grocery list, but when you're juggling this level of complexity, you need real tools. And honestly, they've got a point. There's a difference between remember to buy milk and coordinating a multi-million-dollar project with 50 stakeholders. But then there's this other camp that's questioning the whole premise. One user, just for fun here, dropped this bomb. They abandoned all to-do apps entirely and just rely on their memory now. And get this, they claim there's been no discernible difference in their productivity. Makes you wonder if we're just creating busy work for ourselves, doesn't it? What really emerged from the discussion is this idea that maybe it's not about the tool at all. Multiple commenters pointed out that what actually drives productivity is the ritual, that daily review, that discipline of actually looking at your list and doing the work. Whether that list is in a $50 app or a text file or carved into stone tablets, maybe that doesn't matter as much as we think.
The author makes this point about how limitations actually increase productivity, and I think there's something profound there. No tags means you can't procrastinate by reorganizing your system. No themes means you're not spending 20 minutes picking the perfect color scheme. No sync issues means you're not troubleshooting why your tasks aren't showing up on your phone. You know what this reminds me of? It's like that old joke about spending more time automating a task than you'd ever spend just doing it manually. We've built this entire industry around task management with venture capital and subscription models and feature roadmaps, and maybe all we needed was just Notepad. But here's the thing, and this is what makes this discussion so rich. Different people have genuinely different needs. If you're a freelancer managing a few projects, yeah, a text file might be perfect. If you're coordinating complex workflows across teams, you probably need something more robust. The mistake is thinking there's one perfect system for everyone. What I love about this story is how it's making people question their assumptions. We've been told for so long that we need these specialized tools, that productivity requires the right app. But maybe what we really need is just to pick something, anything, and stick with it long enough to build those habits and rituals that actually get things done. And speaking of questioning what really matters in tech and life, all right, switching gears completely here. Let's talk about something that really struck a chord with the Hacker News community. Steve Wozniak, life to me was never about accomplishment, but about happiness. This story absolutely exploded with over 900 points and nearly 500 comments. And honestly, after reading through the discussion, I totally get why. You know, in an industry that's become synonymous with hustle culture, billion-dollar valuations, and this relentless drive to change the world, Woz's philosophy feels like, I don't know, like finding a cool breeze on a scorching day. The comments section turned into this fascinating collection of personal encounters with the man himself, and every single story paints the same picture. Here's a guy who genuinely lives what he preaches. One commenter shared how they randomly met Woz at a restaurant, and he just sat down and chatted with them for an hour. Another person talked about seeing him at tech events, always approachable, always willing to talk to anyone. There's this recurring theme where people describe him as the complete opposite of what you'd expect from someone who co-founded Apple. No entourage, no attitude, just Woz, being Woz. What really got people talking was this contrast between Wozniak and, well, pretty much every other tech titan you can think of. The discussion kept circling back to how different his approach is from Jobs, Gates, Musk, these figures who seem driven by this insatiable need to accomplish more, build more, control more. In Silicon Valley terms, that's practically pocket change for someone of his stature. And that's where the conversation got really philosophical. People started questioning why more billionaires don't think this way. Why the hoarding? Why the constant accumulation? One commenter put it brilliantly. They said Woz represents what the tech industry could have been if it hadn't gotten so wrapped up in ego and greed. Now, it wasn't all unanimous praise. There was this one contrarian voice, someone named Chistev, who pushed back saying accomplishments lead to happiness and that the two aren't mutually exclusive. Which, fair point, right? But the community largely disagreed, arguing that Woz has plenty of accomplishments. He just doesn't let them define his self-worth. Here's where it gets really interesting, though. A former Apple employee chimed in with this bombshell that inside current Apple culture, Woz is apparently viewed as insane and untrustworthy. Can you imagine? The co-founder of the company, the engineering genius behind the Apple I and II, dismissed by the very organization he helped create. It's like it perfectly illustrates how far Apple has drifted from those garage startup days. The thread also dove into some deeper territory about what happiness actually means in the context of a career. People shared their own struggles with balancing achievement and contentment, with many admitting they'd been chasing the wrong things for years. There's something about Woz's example that seems to give people permission to step off that treadmill, you know? What struck me most was how this discussion became almost therapeutic for the community. In a forum that usually debates the latest JavaScript framework or argues about cryptocurrency, here were hundreds of engineers and entrepreneurs basically saying, yeah, maybe there's more to life than shipping code and raising Series A funding.
And look, I think this resonates so strongly right now because we're seeing the consequences of that growth at all costs mentality everywhere in tech. The layoffs, the burnout, the ethical compromises. Woz represents this alternative path that was always there but somehow got lost along the way. He's proof that you can be brilliant, successful, and influential without becoming a jerk about it. The beautiful irony here is that by not chasing accomplishments, Woz has accomplished something most tech leaders never will. He's universally loved and respected, not for what he built, but for who he is as a person. And in an industry that often feels like it's lost its soul, that's pretty remarkable. And that brings us to the end of this week's journey through the top stories on Hacker News. What strikes me most about this collection is how they all connect to this central tension in our industry, the promise of technology to make our lives better versus the reality of how it's often being deployed. We started with governments trying to break encryption and control information, moved through corporations, breaking promises and destroying the very platforms we've come to rely on, wrestled with the messy reality of AI integration, and ended with people seeking simplicity and happiness in an increasingly complex world. These aren't just isolated incidents, they're symptoms of an industry at a crossroads. Are we building technology that serves humanity, or are we serving the technology? Are we creating tools that empower people or systems that control them? And perhaps most importantly, are we so focused on what we can build that we've forgotten to ask what we should build? The passionate discussions these stories generated, nearly 7,000 comments across just these 10 stories, show that these questions matter deeply to the tech community. We're not just passive observers, we're active participants in shaping what comes next. Thanks for joining me for this week's deep dive into the stories that matter. This has been the Hacker News Weekly for August 10th through 16th, 2025. Keep questioning, keep building, and most importantly, keep the conversation going. Until next week, stay curious.